The letter arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just come in from shoveling the front walk. We'd had an early November dump of snow, the wet, heavy kind that clogs the drain by the mailbox, and my back was already complaining the way it does now that I'm past 63. I peeled off my gloves, set them on the radiator, and there it was among the flyers and the hydro bill. A cream-colored envelope. The return address was a law firm in Oakville, Whitmore and Associates. I stood in the hallway in my wet boots and stared at it for a long moment. I hadn't heard that name in 11 years. My son was already at the lawyer's office when I arrived. He was sitting across from a man in a gray suit, and when I pushed open the frosted glass door and the receptionist smiled and said, "Mr. Callahan, please go right in." My son turned around in his chair and looked at me the way you look at something you've stepped in. "What is he doing here?" he said. Not to me, to the lawyer. The lawyer, a quiet man named Whitmore, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, cleared his throat and gestured to the chair beside my son. "Your father was named in your mother's will, Theo." I explained that in the letter. Theo didn't look at me again. He stared straight ahead. He had his mother's jaw, sharp and decided, and when he said it like that I could see her in him so clearly it hurt somewhere low in my chest. "He doesn't deserve anything," Theo said. "He walked out on her. He walked out on both of us." I sat down. I set my coat over my knees. I didn't say a word. I had learned, over the years, that there are moments when silence is the only honest thing you have left. Her name was Vivian Callahan, née Tran. She had come to Canada from Saigon with her parents when she was 11 years old, and by the time I met her at a Union Hall Christmas party in Hamilton in 1987, she already spoke better English than I did, and had opinions about everything from fiscal policy to the NHL draft. I fell in love with her in about 45 minutes. It took her considerably longer to feel the same about me, which she never let me forget. We had 31 good years, or mostly good, the kind of good that has winters in it. And then we had the accident. It was March in Ontario, which means the roads haven't decided yet what season they are. We had been at a fundraiser for the hospital foundation. Vivian was on the board by then, had been for years, and these evenings were important to her. I had driven us there. She had a glass of wine, then two, then because it was her colleague's retirement party, and he was a man she genuinely liked, a third. I had stopped at one because I always did at those things. Someone had to drive home, only I didn't drive home. She took the keys from my jacket pocket when I was in the washroom. She told me later she had felt fine, that she was only slightly warm, not impaired, and the drive was 20 minutes on roads she knew. She told me she had done this 100 times. She hadn't. But Vivian had always believed that what she decided was, by definition, reasonable. I came out of the washroom and she was gone. I assumed she'd gone to find our coats. I stood by the coat check for 4 minutes. I know because I checked my phone twice, and then someone's wife came over and touched my arm and said there had been an accident out front. A cyclist. A young man, 24 years old, doing nothing wrong, riding in the bike lane on a road he had every right to be on. Vivian had clipped him. He had gone over the hood and hit the curb. She had pulled over. That much she did. But then she panicked. She called me instead of 911. She was crying so hard I couldn't understand her at first. I ran. I found her standing on the sidewalk with her hands over her mouth. The young man was conscious, which was the only mercy in it. He was sitting up against a Canada Post box holding his arm, and someone had already called an ambulance. There was a police cruiser turning the corner at the end of the block. Vivian looked at me, just looked at me, and I understood what she was asking without her saying a word. You have to understand who she was by then. 15 years on the hospital board. A woman who had spent a decade building a pediatric oncology fund that now paid for treatments for families who couldn't afford them. If she lost her driver's license, lost her reputation, faced criminal charges, all of it was possible. All of it was likely. The foundation would distance itself. The donors would pull back. She had told me once that the fund had enough momentum to run itself, but she had also told me that wasn't true in the same breath. It needed her name, her face, her credibility. And Theo was 16. He was already accepted to a math and science program in Toronto. His whole future was arranged around a mother who was intact. I looked at the police cruiser coming down the street. I stepped between Vivienne and the road. Go back inside, I said. Tell them you were in the bathroom. Tell them you didn't see what happened, Lawrence. Go, she went. I told the officers I had been driving. I said I hadn't seen him until it was too late. I said she had come out after, that she'd been inside when it happened, that I hadn't wanted to upset her, so I'd told her to wait. The young man, his name was Ethan, I learned this later, had a concussion and a broken collarbone. He survived. He recovered fully, though it took months. The story held because I believed it when I said it. That is the only explanation I have for why it worked. I had rehearsed nothing. I simply decided that I had been the one driving, and I spoke from that place. I was charged with dangerous driving causing bodily harm. I had a lawyer, a decent one, but the facts were what they were, and I pled guilty because I was guilty of something, even if not the specific thing they had charged. I served 14 months at Maplehurst. I lost my contractor's license. I came out to find that Vivienne had begun divorce proceedings 3 weeks after sentencing. She didn't visit. She sent a letter through her own lawyer explaining that the relationship had become untenable, that my actions had put the family under an impossible strain, that she hoped I understood. I understood. What she could not afford was a husband who was a convicted criminal. What the foundation could not afford was association with that. She had made a calculation, and I had handed her the numbers. I couldn't even be angry. It was almost admirable. In a way I still cannot fully articulate. Theo was 17 by the time I was released. He had moved with his mother to Oakville. He had started at a private school. When I called the house, he answered once and said, "Don't call here again," and hung up. He said it the way you say something you have been rehearsing. His mother had told him I had driven drunk. I don't know if she told him that on purpose, or if she simply let him believe it. It amounted to the same thing. I moved to Sudbury. I had a cousin there who gave me work doing renovations. I built a small life the way you build anything after a flood, from what's left, with what you have. I thought about calling Theo every year on his birthday. Every year I didn't. There is a kind of cowardice that disguises itself as consideration, and I am not proud of how long I lived inside it. The letter from Whitmore and Associates said that Vivienne had passed in September, a stroke, sudden, at 61. It said she had left a will dated 8 months before her death, and that I had been named in it, and that my presence was requested at the reading. I drove the 6 hours from Sudbury in one go. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I booked a room at a Holiday Inn off the QEW, and I sat on the edge of the bed that night with my hands on my knees, and I thought about the last time I had seen her face. At the sentencing, she had been in the gallery. She had not looked at me. When Mr. Whitmore finally opened the folder in front of him, Theo was sitting with his arms crossed and his jaw set and his eyes on the window. He had not spoken to me since his opening remark. He was 33 now. He worked in financial risk in Toronto. He had a partner, a daughter I had never met. I knew this from a single internet search I had allowed myself 2 Christmases ago, and immediately regretted. "Before we proceed to the disposition of assets, Mr. Whitmore said, and he said it in the particular careful tone of a man who knows what he is about to detonate, your mother asked that a personal letter be read aloud. She was very specific about that. She wanted both of you present, and she wanted it read in full." Theo uncrossed his arms. "What letter?" "A letter she wrote 8 months ago, addressed to you both." I looked at my hands. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat and began, "Theo, Lawrence, if you're in the same room right now, I imagine the atmosphere is uncomfortable. I'm sorry for that, and I'm sorry for a great many things this letter is going to say. I want to begin with the night of March 14th, 2013. Theo made a sound, not a word, a sound. Mr. Whitmore did not stop. I was driving the car that hit Ethan Merrick. I had 3 glasses of wine at the Riverside Hospital Foundation Gala, and I took Lawrence's keys while he was in the washroom because I believed, genuinely believed, that I was fine to drive. I was not fine to drive. I hit a young man in the bike lane on Dundas Street West, and I panicked and I called Lawrence instead of 911. Lawrence asked me to go back inside. He told the police he had been driving. He pled guilty to a charge that was mine to carry, and he served 14 months at Maplehurst Correctional Center on my behalf. I told myself I let him do it because of the foundation, because of the children who needed the funding, because of you, Theo, your school, your future, the version of our life that required me to be intact. I told myself his sacrifice was practical, logical, even noble. I have had 11 years to sit with what I actually did, and I can tell you that there is no version of it that holds up. What I did was take a man's life from him because I was frightened, and then I discarded him so that no one would look too closely. I filed for divorce because a husband in prison was a liability. I allowed you, Theo, to believe your father was a reckless drunk who had destroyed our family. I did not correct you. I told myself you were better off angry than confused, and that was the most dishonest thing I ever thought. Lawrence never told you. Not once in 11 years. I know because I had him watched. Early on, when I was afraid he might, he never did. He moved to Sudbury and he worked renovations, and he did not call the newspapers or a lawyer or your school. He simply disappeared into the life I had left him with. I do not know if you can forgive me, Theo. I don't know if you can forgive him for keeping a secret that wasn't his to keep. But I am asking you to understand, if understanding is possible, that the worst thing I ever did was not the accident. The worst thing was letting you believe it was him. I have loved you both, in the ways I was capable of. I am aware those ways were sometimes very small. Vivienne. The room was quiet for a long time. Theo's reflection in the window, I was watching it because I could not look at him directly, was completely still. The set jaw was gone. He looked younger. He looked, for a moment, like the 16-year-old who had answered the phone and told me not to call again. Mr. Whitmore set the letter down. With respect to the estate, he said, and his voice had gone a little careful, a little gentle. Mrs. Callahan's assets are to be divided equally between her son Theodore and her former husband Lawrence. The principal residence in Oakville has been listed for sale, and proceeds split. Registered investment accounts valued at approximately $430,000, split equally. There is also a trust account established for Ethan Merrick in the amount of $50,000, with instructions that it be delivered anonymously. I heard Theo exhale, a slow, ragged sound. She never told me, he said. Not to Mr. Whitmore, not exactly to me. To the window, to the room, to some version of the last 11 years that was rearranging itself in front of him in real time. She never said a single word. No, I said. She didn't. He turned and looked at me then, and I let him look. I didn't try to fill the space with anything. I had learned over 11 years of silence that some spaces need to be felt before they can be crossed. I called you, he said. When I was 17, I called you once and I told you not to call back. I know. I thought. He stopped. He pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose, the way you do when you're trying to keep something from spilling. I thought you had chosen a bottle of wine over your family. I know what you thought. Why didn't you tell me? I had rehearsed this. In the car on the way down, in the Holiday Inn, in the elevator, on the way up to this floor, I had rehearsed an answer that was measured and fair and took into account his feelings and his mother's complicated legacy. But sitting across from him now, with his face doing what it was doing, all of that fell away. Because she was your mother, I said, and you needed her to be who she was. And I thought, I hoped, that it would matter more for you to grow up with a whole parent than to grow up knowing the truth about both of us. Was that your decision to make? No, it wasn't. But it was the one I made, and I've lived in it for 11 years, and I'm not going to pretend it was noble. It was the decision I made at a moment when I didn't know what else to do. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, I have a daughter. She's 4. Her name is Rosalie. I didn't say anything. She asks about her grandfather sometimes, he said. I tell her I'll explain when she's older. He looked down at his hands. I don't know what I'm going to explain now. You could start with the truth, I said. It's uncomfortable, but it keeps its shape. Something crossed his face then. Not a smile. Something adjacent to one. Something that recognized the sentence as the kind of thing a father might say. We didn't hug in the parking lot. I want to be honest about that because the story would be tidier if we had. We stood by our respective cars. He drives a silver Subaru, practical, a man with a child, and we talked for another 20 minutes in the cold. The kind of November cold that means business. I forgot to put my gloves back on, and my hands went numb and I didn't mention it. He asked about Sudbury. I told him about the renovation work, about the cousin who'd given me a start, about the apartment I had now with the view of Lake Ramsey that I had come to love, in the way you love things you didn't choose. He told me about his work, about his partner whose name is Audra, about Rosalie, who apparently has opinions about everything and will not go to sleep before 10 o'clock no matter what anyone tries. She sounds like her grandmother, I said, before I could stop myself. He went quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Yeah, he said, she does. Before he got in his car, he turned and said, I don't know how to do this, any of this. I don't know what we are now or what we're supposed to be. We don't have to know today, I said. I'm angry, he said. I want you to know that. I'm angry at her and I'm angry at you and I don't know which of those is fair. Both, I said. Both is fair. He nodded slowly. He opened his car door. He paused with one hand on the roof and said, without looking at me, Rosalie's birthday is in February the 8th. We do a family thing. Audra's parents come, her sister. He stopped. There's usually room at the table. I stood in the parking lot and watched his taillights until they turned out onto the street. The cold was significant by then. The kind of cold that reminds you you're still here, still standing, still breathing in the particular gray November air of southern Ontario that I had somehow missed for 11 years without realizing it. I put my gloves on. I thought about Vivienne, writing that letter 8 months before she died, sitting at whatever desk she sat at now, in the house in Oakville I had never seen, choosing words she had spent 11 years not choosing. I thought about what it costs to finally say a true thing. I thought about Ethan Merrick, 35 years old now somewhere, with a collarbone that probably aches in weather like this, receiving a trust payment from an anonymous source and never knowing the full shape of what it was connected to. I thought about February the 8th. I got in my truck and I drove north, back toward a life that had been small and quiet and entirely mine, knowing that something in it was about to change, and finding, for the first time in a very long time, that I was not afraid of that.